Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. As I have mentioned to you earlier, I've been a fan for a long time. I know you got started in like 2012, and you've done so much good work putting such good information out there for people like me who is in business, but also is in the world of this media that we do. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
So how did your family make it out to, how did you make it out to LA? How did your family make it out to the US?
Yeah, okay, so those are two questions. I'll start in the sequential part of it. April 30th, 1975, fall of Saigon, my parents fled like many Vietnamese people did. I'm sure you're aware of the history. And we initially landed in Kansas City, Missouri, but eventually my family made it to Northern California in San Jose. I only came down to LA to go to school at the Art Center College of Design. And since coming down here and working in the motion design industry, which is pretty much here, I've never left. So I've lived now in LA longer than I've lived anywhere else.
Wow. And where along the journey did you realize that you wanted to do design and be in art?
I think like a lot of first generation Americans, I think the idea of doing something in the creative space or not going down the traditional path, it was seen with a lot of skepticism and worry and concern from parents because of course they don't want you to suffer. But I think I internalized that voice that design and art was for something that you play, not something that's real. And I didn't have any real clear role models in terms of who is successful at doing design as a career, where we had many examples of doctors, attorneys, engineers, people in that space in the respected fields that they're in, that there was a path for success. But for design, my only impressions of people who did design were the ones who worked at the fairgrounds, who did airbrush t-shirts, which I was just amazed by their hand skill, the people who painted or drew caricatures of you, and they made some money, or the artists who were lined up along Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco who were trying to sell works of art that nobody seemed to buy, so they didn't look like they were in great financial condition. So I suppressed that part, that desire, but I drew. I looked at design. I was really into fashion. I wasn't sure of my orientation, like sexual orientation. Maybe I'm gay. I don't know. Why am I into all these things? Looking at interior design magazines, reading GQ, and just studying like interior design, like, and looking around our house, like, why don't we live like these people in these magazines? And just allowing my imagination to kind of get the better of me and just dream and live in that space. So it wasn't until I met an actual real life graphic designer, his name is Dean Walker, working out of his house, designing logos and packaging, that I then knew this was it. This is for me.
How did you meet that person?
Very coincidentally, I was working at a silkscreen shop. I was basically a tracer for all you kids. You know, I was inking over my boss's drawings and just production work. And then one day he's like, I need you to run over here and pick up some typesetting. Never even heard of that term before. I jumped in my Nissan 200SX hatchback, drove out to this guy's house, waited outside, and was like, I wonder if he's ready. Knocked on the door, and this guy comes out, like an American dude, Hawaiian shirt and shorts. He's like, you're early, come on in. And that's how I met him. I was just there to pick up typesetting. And I was seeing someone use a Macintosh computer in a professional way that I had never seen before. Now, prior to that, I saw people use things like Mac Paint. They seem crude and childish and not professional. But here he was designing and manipulating typography, something that was very hard to do by hand. And he was doing it really quickly. And he printed out on the first Apple laser printer. And I was like, this is genius. I can't believe you can do work that this high quality. And that was it. I knew then and there, this was going to be my future.
You know, meeting people along the way, like Dean Walker, and, you know, at 42, I think you were told by a college, your college roommate or a classmate that you get into you. These are all lucky coincidences that happen throughout our lives. Like, so much luck is that it plays a role in the success of our lives. Don't you think?
Yeah, but there's this thing that I'm probably going to butcher it. Like, luck is the residue of hard work and preparation and timing, right? And so if I don't, here's what I think. We're all really lucky, but most of us don't open the door to let luck in. We look at luck as a burden or going out of a comfort zone or going into the unknown, and we close that door. We kind of, we put the deadbolt on so luck can't get inside. And I see this happening all the time. So I was at school, just minding my own business, doing drawings. And my younger brother, who's on the wrestling team, his coach Rudy said, "Hey, your brother draws, right? Would he like to work at a silk screening place?" Now, I sort of knew what silk screening was, but I didn't ever see it up close and firsthand. So when my brother told me about this, I showed up with my portfolio in hand, whatever you could call a portfolio. And I was hired on the spot. And he says, "You can start right now. Start inking this." And I was like, "What?" And he was paying me $18 an hour, which is like 5 times more than what I was being paid at my last minimum wage job. So it's just like there's opportunities, there's a calling to adventure, and you have to be willing to go. You have to cross the threshold. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey?
Am.
Yeah, so we know this happens all the time. Now, it makes for better stories, and in fiction, where the hero, in this case me, would refuse to call and try to run away from it. But in my life, I found that when there's a call to adventure, just say yes, say why not, and then figure out what the consequences are later. And every time I've done so, I've been rewarded by that. So I go work for Brad. Months later, I'm picking things up for him, doing errands. I could have said, "Hey man, that's not my job. You didn't pay me to be your gopher.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be an artist, right?" And I'm like, "No, I'll do it. No problem."
That is sort of the first step to 1,000 steps of the things that you've done in your life. You've done, so much public speaking. You've done so many videos. You've created companies, shut down companies, and you continue to put out so much information. And along the way, are you saying that just do it and then let it all take care of itself? Because there's got to be some grueling challenges along the way. How do you suffer through that? How do you get through the challenging stuff?
Yeah, there's 2 things that you're bringing up. One is sometimes opportunities or distractions. We have to be able to see that, because it's like, I don't like what I'm doing right now, and I see this shiny object over here, and I'm going to go chase after that. So I no longer progress in this area. And let's say, for example, 2 years ago, everybody was talking about NFTs, money millionaires were being made overnight. And so you could have dropped your primary business just to chase quick money. I don't believe those are good things, but when things are aligned with who you are, what you want to do, what gives you joy and purpose and meaning in your life, pursue those things and be open to ways in which you could do it better or faster. That's all good. So I know this, and I've seen this since I was in high school. Several of my friends graduated from high school, going to college, thinking, "I'm going to make my money doing this thing." And I knew, it was like, do you really love that thing? No, they did it because they thought that was the fastest path towards getting a quick payday. And we'll continue to see the story for as long as humanity is around, where some charlatan will sell you an idea, a concept, get your money and get rich off of your desire to not do work and get a quick exit. They're going to be selling these products and these ideas to you to the end of time. And they're going to be suckers who line up for that. Everybody's looking for a shortcut. What I'm talking about is do the hard work to be able to show up every single day when things are not in your favor, just to push through the difficult part. Seth Godin writes about this in his book, The Dip. He's like, we all go through this part where it stops being fun, it stops being rewarding. We slide into this valley, the dip, and we want to quit because it's not fun anymore. It just feels like a lot of work and it's not going anywhere. It's not giving us anything back. So we quit. That's the part where you have to persevere. You have to be resilient and you have to push through. So every company that I've run a couple of companies, there's always these moments where you feel like you reached the peak and you're coasting for a while and you're really happy. But what you realize, it's not the peak of the mountain. It's just the tip of the base of the next mountain. And you got to just keep climbing again. And it's another climb. You get to $2 million in revenue. Well, guess what? Getting to 4 million is really tough. Getting to 6 million is really tough. And it just gets harder because there are bigger challenges. I think what you earn in this life is directly proportionate to the problems that you have to take on. The bigger the problem, the more money you'll make. And the greater the responsibility that you take on, the more money you'll make. So these are things that most people run away from.
That book is phenomenal. I love it. It helps illuminates the path of how difficult things are, but when to sort of like let go and give up, because the dip, Seth Godin's The Dip, talks about, if you get into the dip and you find yourself having a very difficult time compared to your peers or people in that space, and you have a hard time recovering and getting out, that thing was not meant for you to do. If it keeps showing up, right? If it keeps showing up as a difficult thing, then you got to get out.
Sort of. There's 2 messages in the book, and it's kind of a very nuanced way to interpret the 2 messages. One is, once you decide, do not quit no matter what. The other is, if you're going to quit early.
Right.
That's the thing. That's the difference there. So what he's really saying is be in touch with who you are and what you want to accomplish in this life, and try to predetermine in your mind, I'm really not that into this. So when things get tough, I will quit. In those cases, you want to quit before you even start. And the things that you commit yourself to, push through the grind when it's not fun, when it feels like a lot of work, and you can do it. I'll give you the example, right? My former business partner, the one who got me to make YouTube content, we had differing opinions about how to run the channel. So I said, out of mutual respect for you and what I want to do, we should do this independently of each other. And I would grind on it. And every day I would ask myself, gosh, I'm not getting that runaway success, but let's keep trying to tweak whatever we're doing, improve it a little bit, do a little bit less stupid things that don't work, do a little bit more of the things that are working. And eventually we get there. And eventually we get there. We have a couple like runaway hits, and they've been very good for the channel's growth. And I continue to see like what else I can do. So there's something that you need to know about me. I'm a constant improver. My therapist told me this is part of your psychological profile. That means that give you something and you're going to just sit there and in your mind, you're going to optimize and innovate, optimize and innovate. And I work well in that way. So perhaps I was the type of person who's kind of cosmically designed to take on challenges and to live in the dip until I can crawl my way out. So, Blair Enns said this, all strategy is autobiographical. And so, yeah, I believe it works. You get in the dip, put your head down, and you're trying to figure out how to get out. And eventually, if you don't give up, you will figure it out.
Holy shit. That doesn't give much hope to the rest of us who are not programmed to improve.
Or maybe it'll inspire you to say, maybe I have it too, and I just haven't given enough time.
I have a question that came up while you're telling me this. I'm thinking about my own path and my own struggles. And the interviews are the interviews and what I do. I'm close to 300 now, and it's a path that I love. And no matter how esoteric or how niche down the guests are, I will continue to do that. But I also created this other side thing called the Vietnamese life, which is like taking exploration in different aspects of living. I have a whole camp of people who I hang out with in the film space and media space. And they're divided. Some people are saying, do what you want. And this is a broader question for everybody. Do what you want. Do what makes you feel happy and right. And there's the other camp that says, no, you do what the people want. And here's where the breakdown is. For example, the new Barbie movie that's coming out has been banned in Vietnam. And it's very interesting to me because there's this component of a US product like Barbie, iconic. They're banning it because of the 9-dash line that signifies these islands in Vietnam, as China, quote unquote, owns these islands. So now Vietnam, the government has said, you know what, we're not letting Barbie in because of 2 seconds of whoever's mistake that was at Warner Brothers or Paramount or whatever that owns Barbie. They're saying that we are putting a ban on that film. I want to do an episode, a 10-minute thing about this. My brother and a few of the guys like, dude, stick to food lists, the best pho, the best, compete against ramen and pho, like go with where the people are. So I wanted to ask you in this episode today, how does a creator like me make these decisions where one, I know the Barbie conversation is not going to bring the eyeballs and the listenership that the food list will bring. And not that I look down on the food list, it's just not who I am. But I'm at a crossroads constantly with these kinds of decisions.
Okay. I thought it was going to be harder to answer this question, but I have an easier answer for you as you were talking. Here's the bottom line. Don't get good at doing something you hate because you just get more of it. So if you're not a food list kind of guy, and if you're not like a foodie and you don't want to put on 400 pounds, you might want to stay away from that. You got to do things that you're passionate about because people, even though you might not know it, can sense your passion. I think one of the things that people really connect with me or don't connect with me is how passionate I am about the things that I say and talk about. I believe what I believe 100%. If I don't, I'm not talking about it. I have an opinion on lots of things and I'm not afraid to share it. So if this is who you are and you want to show up for this and you want to talk about media and being culturally insensitive, or perhaps like, hey, Vietnam, get over it. You're depriving people of an excellent piece of entertainment. I can't say it because I wouldn't watch the movie, but
Yeah.
Those are kinds of things that you're going to navigate. But here's the thing. Don't do it because this might be the topic of the day or something that might pop. Because if you want to do this again, you're only going to alienate the people who already follow you, who care about you. And you're only going to bring in people like, oh, I thought he was going to talk about Barbie and movies and being culturally aware and sensitive to certain things. And you don't ever do that again. So you have not done yourself any favors. So I know a lot of people want to do like beauty and makeup and food lists and how to travel for cheap, or I'm an attorney, here's how you work the system. If that's you, then by all means do it. And if it's not you, don't chase that, because you'll get good at doing something you hate and then a life that'll make you miserable.
That's great advice. But the second part of that question, the follow-up is like, well, what if you are so damn esoteric, you're so niche down on what you like that it's almost impossible to build a following? And what if it never comes?
What topic could that be, you think? Let's try and examine it as a specific versus a general concept. What do you think that might be?
What do you think the failure might be?
What do I think the failure? No, like what niche topic might be too niche that it's too weird and esoteric?
Oh, another topic that I wrote down, and my brother and a few of my friends were like, stick with the food list, man, was the idea of wearing an AIGA in the US. It's a cultural sort of like conversation. What men don't wear AIGA in Vietnam. They don't just wear it to a premiere. They don't wear it to a wedding. They don't wear that, but we do in the US. We like to put on AIGA at certain events and stuff like that. So that's a very topical thing. There's a new car company called VinFast that's coming from Vietnam, and it's a car company that is made in Vietnam by Vietnamese money, by corporation in Vietnam. They're like, that's just so esoteric. Who cares about that stuff? We don't care about it. We only care about like the more general things, food and what kinds of books or maybe films are out there, but we don't care about the very specific topics.
Okay. Let's make this then understandable for everybody. There are very niche topics that you can talk about, and the more niched it is, the smaller the audience you have potentially of hitting. So as soon as you go from mass communication, you go to niche marketing or niche communication, you're talking to a very small group. And of that, you hope to capture some percentage of them, because not every Vietnamese man wants to talk about the traditional dress, right? They don't want to talk about that. So there's a way that you can make this work. You have to be able to, and I believe this, you can talk about super niche topics that you have a deep passion and knowledge for, but you have to find the hook. And Brendan Kane talks about this in his book, Hook Point and 1 Million Followers. So you can be like into certain kinds of customs and cultural ways, and especially as refugees or first generation immigrants or something like that, how it's important for our culture to be connected. And you can say like, what are your cultural connections? What are things that you feel that no one understands outside your culture, but you feel a sense of pride or obligation that you must continue in this because you don't want to let go of your roots? So now you've taken something that's hyper niche, but you made it super accessible, and you bring people in that way. And then as they're in, so you're going to say, so here's an example. As a Vietnamese American man, I see people wearing this, and even in Vietnam, they don't wear this anymore. And I want to bring this up for discussion. And here are 4 ways of looking at it that might open your eyes. And then you go back out and say, here's what you might want to ask yourself as you're looking at your own customs and things that you feel like are part of your core values. How might that inform that conversation? So you can definitely do that.
This is like a master class in how to proceed with my life, and I'm sure a lot of other media people's life. I mean, how did you get this sharp with the amount of knowledge and experience that you have? Because I see it in the slides and the video presentations that you do all over social media. They're so succinct and they're so full of clarity. How do you think you whittled it all down to this sort of like simplicity?
I would love to take most of the credit, and I can't. I can take some of it, but my mind is wired to think simplistically, where most people get stuck with making things overcomplicated, overthinking. They don't ask you one question, they ask you 45 questions baked into one. And this is how they live their life. And this is why people are always stuck at that that intersection between decisions, and they can't take a specific one. And I'm very cognizant of this as I see it in people. I start telling myself a story like, you know what? Make it simpler. And there's a quote, I think it's from Einstein. It's like, if you can't explain something simply, maybe you just don't understand it well enough. And I go with that, right? So you go into academia, you know this. People tend to use $6 words. They make things super complicated. They're long run-on sentences, and there's a lot of commas in how they speak. And it requires the pre-reading to be able to understand. So they're not great communicators. And if you want to be a great communicator, whether you like people or not, some of the best politicians understand how to phrase big ideas so that the everyday person can understand it. And that's the power of communication. Now, the other part to it is, just keep in mind, everybody, before I made my first YouTube video, I taught for 15 years at a private art school. And then I ran a company for 20 plus years, working with staff, freelancers, interns, and also talking to clients who can sometimes be very difficult to talk to. So you couldn't get through that crucible of Los Angeles, super hyper competitive market, without learning how to connect and communicate with people and build rapport. And so that's where that stems from. But as a designer too, you know this, as a designer, as a person who works in visual arts, you're trying to design where the eye goes.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a VFX shot, right? It's like you use color, composition, you use cues of action, lines of perspective, and lighting to be able to draw your eye, because a scene is quite complicated and you want to make sure you're directing the eye where it needs to go. So when I'm designing a logo, I'm not trying to literally illustrate the chef who's making the pizza. I'm trying to capture the idea of the company, the name, brand, philosophy, not the actual process of making pizza. This is where a lot of logo designers are like, what? I thought you were supposed to illustrate that. No, you don't. Not at the level in which we're playing. So you're trying to take complex things and you're reducing it down to what is essential. And I think in the way I try to explain things, I try to do it that exact same way, whether it's in slide or spoken form.
Now, when you were designing yourself as the designer, and when you were working with clients, how did you know when you were finished with the design? And how did you know what to tell the clients? Hey guys, you're done. We're done here. We're like, this design is perfect, or it's ready to go out. Okay.
Usually it's done because there's a deadline and mandates that it be done, because I think if you just keep extending the deadline, designers will keep working on it. It's very rarely you could see something. It's like, I cannot fix one thing. I cannot improve something. It's almost always built on a deadline. I want to design a t-shirt. I want to design a poster. There's no client, but I know if I don't send it out to print, I'm going to pay exorbitant rush fees and I might not get it shipped to me in time. And then therefore, when I try to sell those shirts or the t-shirt, the shirts or the prints, it won't happen because it didn't arrive on time. So it's really driven by deadlines, I think. When you say to yourself, this is the best that I can do with what I have in the time I was given, and you have to be okay with that. There's a lot of experiments when they let artists work forever. They don't make more pieces. They're not better quality. It just takes them a really, really long time. And oftentimes, as the experiments have shown, the results are much better when they're given deadlines.
This is great to know, because constraints is what helps us deliver. And without these constraints, basically in a world where you're in a commercial world where you have to deliver and there's real constraints of money and deadline, that sets us up for, a finished produced product. But in the space of like where I come from, where we're just creating and we have no control, we have to put these artificial constraints on, or else we're never going to get work done, it seems.
Yeah. There's a movie, I forget that, I'm looking it up right now. Is it John Carter? Yes, John Carter. Okay, I just want to point out something and tie it to what you just said. When you're given unlimited amounts of money and time, resources, you would say that, well, in the world of how everything's supposed to work, the most money, the most resources, the greatest amount of support should lead to a financial bonanza. And oftentimes it's not. Like you and I, as an audience member, walk into a theater and walk out and say, who is the idiot who greenlit this project? Everybody involved should be fired and never be allowed to do this again, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when we're given lots and lots of constraints, I remember many years ago, I saw this promo for MTV. I want to say it's like for Yo MTV Raps or something. It's probably not, but it's something that's related to hip hop. And because I know usually these budgets are tiny. And so what these creatives did was they took a cardboard box and they cut the silhouette of a breakdancer, a b-boy, doing a head spin. So it's a two-dimensional character. They colored with markers and colored paper, and they attached it to a wire, and they put the wire through a box, and somebody on their box was spinning it like this. So he was doing a head spin. Super low quality, crude, won a bunch of awards because people are like, that's so inventive. They probably had $7 on that entire budget, put a video camera on this, and they were able to become super inventive. So oftentimes, and you may know this too, from the culinary world, the really good food don't usually come from nobility. It doesn't come from rich poor people. People will have to scrape things together and be super inventive. They're the ones who make the most interesting cuisine that then gets adopted by the middle class and eventually by nobility. It's almost always that necessity is the mother of invention. So when you give people too many resources, too much time, and too much money, it usually falls apart.
Yeah, that seems to be the case in a lot of the big budget films. You're like, that makes no sense. You had all this money at your fingertips, and here's a shitty product.
Yeah. Notice almost always the sequels to hit movies are always worse than the previous movie, and each subsequent sequel gets worse because the first movie, they had lots of constraints. They had everybody looking at them saying, this is going to fail. You need to hurry up and finish this. You don't have the money. Let's go. And then the sequel comes out, and then the trilogy happens, and they're like, what happened? Because now they have no constraints. They renegotiated the contract. We get final cut. We get to do whatever we want, and we get to cast whoever we want because we know how to make hits. Well, it turns out you don't.
So this next topic comes from this, it derives from this, that we're constraint topic. The idea of Vietnam and it being itself a brand compared to like a Korea for the last 35 years has had a lot of money being poured into its infrastructure for media and art, and arguably for this industry. Vietnam, on the other hand, has put money into other things. It's other sorts of development and infrastructure. There, a lot of buildings have gone up, a lot of transportation changes, but the media side has been limited. Not the government hasn't woken up to that yet, but yet the product is coming out shitty. I think 90% of the box office in Vietnam, domestic films bombed last year. So we are, as a media community, my friends and I and people that I know have really sort of put a lot of energy and effort into building and getting that improved in the last 20 years. But what can be done when things are severely limited, the constraints are severely limited coming out of Vietnam? And obviously I have more questions when it comes to branding Vietnamese. This is the first question, is with so much financial and budgetary constraints coming out of Vietnam, what can a country like Vietnam do to lift itself up?
There's so many factors involved in this. I'm not sure I'm qualified to say, so I'm going to give you a fairly uninformed opinion about this, and maybe we go off that, okay? Let's ask ourselves this question. Those films that bombed, 90% of the films that were made, do you think they would not have bombed if they had more money?
Great question. Yeah, they would still bomb.
Yeah, because I know students who make really good films and they don't need any money. And oftentimes when they're given more money, the product gets worse. So it's not always that. Like, we have to accept a couple different things. It's a still relatively immature market run by people who don't probably know what they're doing, who are giving money to people or greenlighting pictures that probably shouldn't be greenlit because it's probably some form of cronyism, perhaps. And it's going to take a couple of cycles for it to get better. And let's not discount this factor that the American marketing machine in terms of IP is so strong. It's not just strong in Vietnam, it's strong all over the world. Like, how many British films do you watch compared to American films? Where like, these are developed countries that have had centuries of development, head start, money, resources, infrastructure, right? So we have to kind of say like, and there was a guy I was talking to in the days of Clubhouse. He's like, if America catches a cold, the UK sneezes. It's like we feel it right away. And so the influence, this what people refer to as soft power, is where the new battle will be won. And Korea is doing a bang up job of doing this. So they figured out, you know what? We have a couple of products and ideas. We can we can do well making TVs and cars, and we can break through that barrier and the stereotype that Korea can be taken seriously as a luxury automobile manufacturer and engineers and designers. But also now K-pop, K-drama, K-soap opera, everything Korean is super hot, and they have tremendous amounts of influence, winning Academy Awards and producing strange concepts that I think are so uniquely Korean. It's like, this is very cool. And I love this. And I love just to say, you know what, Asians, I think it's a moment right now. Asians are having a moment.
Yeah.
And I think we can ride with that. And we don't always have to be the tip of the spear. But what we have to do is do two things. Or three things. We have to have a more mature infrastructure, the people, the powers that be, the executives who are assigned to like do this, to make sure they know what they're doing, not because they knew somebody. Probably a big problem that there's not corruption there. Number two is we need to have creators who can compete on the global stage. So my suggestion there would be to make sure that those Vietnamese directors and writers probably need to compete in an international market first, make a name with all that knowledge and experience, come back and say, this is how it's done, everybody. Now we know how to make films that work, and we'll make them culturally relevant and sensitive to what's going on here. The third is you have to have a market that has an appetite for Vietnamese written and directed and produced films. That may not be the case because America and part of the West do such a great job of branding that we want those things and we consider those superior and homemade goods inferior. So if the domestic market doesn't want it, you're climbing an uphill battle.
Yeah, but the Korean content does very well in Vietnam, extremely well.
It does everywhere in the world, in Japan, in Taiwan. That's all they watch now. So what they've done is they figured out a unique variation of the Hollywood model, and they're able to make it in their own way. Just like how Japanese artists were influenced by Disney and then created manga and anime because of that. So they created a unique style while trying to emulate what Disney was doing. And now Disney is following suit by trying to emulate what Japanese artists, manga and anime are doing. So it's kind of interesting how they influence each other.
And same with Hollywood and Korea, perhaps.
I think so.
Yeah. But what do you think that is? What do you think that the Koreans did right? What do you think? And I don't mean process or technical. In terms of their messaging and their stories being so unique, how do you think that they got to that point?
Okay, this is going to be strange, but I'm going to introduce the Japanese concept the way it was explained to me. So forgive me, everybody, if I butchered it. I know I will. So I apologize in advance. Okay, send all letters of complaint to Kenneth and not myself here. Okay. You know, I teach, and I always struggle with this, in that why do students have such a hard time learning creative things? And I think part of it is baked into the DNA of a creative person, which is generally more a divergent thinker versus a convergent thinker. So the way I understand convergent thinking is you believe there's like one way to do it and there's only one right way. Divergent thinking is there's many ways and there's no right way. All ways can work as long as they eventually work. So when I'm trying to teach students, I think there's a very clear process. I want to make this as painless as possible for them. And what they do is they reject that that's your way, I'm going to find my way. So they struggle mightily and they get to the last week of the last semester and like, oh yeah, you're right. Now we need to do it your way, huh? They got to go through this long, circuitous process to ultimately discover that it may or may not work the way they want to do it, but that's how they do it. So here's the concept that's a Japanese concept. It's called shuhari. And it's a way to understand martial arts, I believe. Okay, so you as a newbie need to learn from some master in karate, black belt, second degree black belt. So you go to his or her dojo. And the shu part is protect. Learn everything that you can from the master as closely as possible to the master. So you try to become a carbon copy. Okay? So ha is when you say, okay, I've learned from you, master. I want to learn other ways. And now I want to try to find where this technique doesn't work. So I'm trying to break it. So the first, we protect it. Number two, we tried to break it. And re is where you leave and you create your own hybrid version. So you're going to combine lots of different thoughts and philosophies and you create a new martial art. This is very important to understand, especially in the West. They don't want to go through the shu, the ha. They just want to go straight to the re. I'm just going to do it my way. And I often refer to as monkey robot brain. It's like you just want to do something crazy and you're going to torture yourself and it's going to be terrible. But this is how they want to learn. So something, and I'll use like a pop culture reference here. I think it's a great film. Not my favorite film, but The Karate Kid, right? Daniel LaRusso gets his butt kicked. He moves to a new town. He looks different. All these wealthy, rich white boys are going to beat up this Latino guy or Italian, right? Daniel LaRusso. And he's getting his butt kicked. And so one day, Mr. Miyagi hears the sounds and he goes out and he saves Daniel. He kicks everybody's butt and he's like, "You okay?" And then he circles back with Mr. Miyagi. And he's like, "Please teach me." He goes, "No. Please teach me. You don't know how hard it is for me." He goes, "I'll teach you under one condition." Do you remember this at all?
Yeah, I do.
So the one condition is what? The one condition is you must do everything I say without question. So in the story, Mr. Miyagi is Japanese. So he's like, "You must do this." Daniel's desperate. He agrees. "Of course I'm going to do everything you say." He goes, "Paint the fence, wax on, wax off." And he's starting to get fed up already. He's only like learned 2 basic moves. He's like, "I thought you were going to teach me karate. You've got me just doing all your garbage work." And then he says, "Daniel-san, paint the fence." And he does a block. Wax on, wax off. He's like, "Wow, I'm learning karate." Now, in the modern American or Western culture, they would not agree to these terms. They would say this is draconian. He is some kind of dictator and we don't learn this way and everybody's got a way to do it and respect my way. And then we all roll our eyes. So when we talk about like the culture, is Vietnam, the community, going to go and copy? I think the Koreans did this. The Japanese did this before them. They're like, "Why is this working?" And they copied BMW. They copied Mercedes. The profile, it's kind of wild. And if you see it, and because I read Motor Trend and Car and Driver, the Hyundai's was like, it kind of looks okay from the profile, kind of looks okay from the front, but the 3/4 doesn't look good at all. Is because that's all they were trying to do. They were trying to say, can we make a car as good as what BMW or Mercedes is making? Let's start by copying. And so they become the laughing stock. People are like, they have no original ideas. But what they didn't realize, the critics, was this is how you learn.
Shit.
You don't go out and build a 3-card automobile that's like backwards. You don't do that. You just copy first and you do it so well that you start to say, what if we change this? Does it make it better? Why is this designed this way? But only after you put in the necessary time, the 10,000 hours, maybe the 10 years, and they all do this. You'll notice that up until recently, up until the last 10, 15 years, Asian automobile manufacturers, Toyota, Lexus, Nissan, all those, they tended to copy their European standard bearers. And you could see a lot of this influence, the character lines, the flared fenders, whatever it was very European. Now Toyota's done this thing where they're more bulbous and they're more aggressive and it feels like uniquely their own visual language. And Hyundai is doing this as well.
Here I am for the last 3 years complaining that the Vietnamese entertainment and music is biting off the K-pop culture. And this is what Vietnam is doing. And great. So this is great news for the Vietnamese pop music scene, is they have really radically changed the face of what we grew up with Paris by Night, because Koreans took what the Americans did with the boy bands and the girl bands, and they just took it to another level and they redefined it in their own way. And I think Vietnam is going through that right now. And I've been complaining for 3 years about how I think that Vietnam is destined for doom and gloom because we're becoming Koreans in essence.
Yeah.
But we're doing it with the Vietnamese language. So there's hope at the end of the tunnel.
There's some hope, but there's ways for it to get wrong too, because you have to copy wholeheartedly, unabashedly, to try to emulate what they're doing and what they've learned. Excuse me. Because otherwise, what you do is you just do a bad copy, and that's terrible. Like you're just doing a cheap knockoff, right? So the shoe part is to do everything they are doing as faithfully as possible without even trying to throw in a variation. Try to do that first. If they have 5 boy band members, you should have 5. Don't do 4. Don't do 17. Just do 5. If they're of a certain height, just do that height. If there's usually one lead guy or they like share the parts, do that. Do it exactly. And this is usually where we run into lots of problems. So let's take in controversial maybe, Chinese knockoff goods. Their purpose is not to protect. They're not following the shoe. They're just saying those companies have spent time in R&D, and we're going to do everything we can to skip to the front and cut corners. And they do a really crappy job. They get parts of it right. Like it kind of looks right, but then the plastic's not right. The engineering, the technical parts is not right. So they make an inferior product that emulates or that something that you would want to buy, and it falls apart immediately. They're actually not trying to spend the time to look at the engineering, to the design inside and out. They're not trying to do faithful copies, and they have no intention of growing beyond that. They're just trying to make a quick buck. There's a big difference there, and we're not sure which is which until we start to see the long-term plan.
And sometimes we don't see it, but we can feel it falling apart.
You can, and you'll know it falls apart right away because you'll buy it and you're like, never again. Never again. Notice something that Hyundai did, which is kind of like an industry first, if I can remember this correctly. Car companies used to do 4-year warranties, bumper to bumper, and then they went to 5. I think Hyundai does 10 years. Like they're like, you know what? We played a game, we go all in and we raise you double. That's what I'm talking about copying. They're not trying to cut corners by saving money in engineering, saying you have the poor man's BMW. They're saying you actually have a better car.
Yeah, it was... I think 10 years and 100,000 miles or something like that. It was some
it's
crazy
ridiculous.
Shit. Yeah, ridiculous, saying we guarantee you are driving a better car than whatever's out there. And they did it. They reached the finish line, basically. Amazing. So at 42, you decide to step into this YouTube space, and you just you gamble on it. But you always talk about you being an introvert. Now, do you think being an introvert has helped you with the video journey, or do you think it doesn't even make a difference?
I think we're all designed in a certain way, whether you believe in God or the cosmic, the universe, Mother Nature, whatever it is that you believe. There's a certain unique set of characteristics and traits that make you you. None of it's an advantage. None of it is an advantage. None of it is a disadvantage. It's how you use these things. Right? I was talking to a friend of mine, a former student who's helping me develop some software, and he practices Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He goes, oh, do you know this guy? He has no arms and he has no legs or something, right? And I'm like, how does one even grapple with no arms and no legs? He goes, you'd be surprised. He's freakishly strong because he has half the weight. So he's fighting in a weight class where his body's built differently, right? And he's super freakishly long. And when you are strong, and when you go to grapple with him, you can't grab anywhere. You don't know how to get this guy. You just can't get him. So I went, he's describing the story. He's like, this shouldn't be that hard. He goes in and he's tapping out instantly. He's like, what is happening? This person is figured out how to use your body type. And for a period of time, until you start to wrestle with somebody like that, and you figure out a strategy, he'll beat you. So we've seen people like that are double or triple jointed go on America's Got Talent and do these freakish shows where they're like bent backwards, their head's like 360. I'm like, what is going on? And people are just freaking out. They've learned how to use a perceived disadvantage and turn it into an asset, a liability into an asset. So if you're an introvert, it's not going to make you better or worse than anybody else. Being an extrovert doesn't make you either. You have to learn how to use what you have. For me, introversion means I don't get energy by being around people. Yeah. I lose energy. So I'm more introspective. I like to spend time with myself. It just turns out a lot of introverted people are good with computers because we work in like solitary, right? Like we work by ourselves and we have a lot of time to think about what we think about. So if you like writing, producing, watching videos by yourself, then you might have an advantage if you know how to get outside of your comfort zone and start to produce content. And so I know extroverts who are just the same. They're deep thinkers, they read and they like to share content and they write, but they don't like this act of communicating in a solitary space. And so then their energy is off. So it's just about how we use what we're given. I think that's more of it than anything else. Yeah,
that's very important. And you're right. It's tools that we are blessed with, and there's different pros and cons with whatever we're given. How did you know that this is a space where you would be able to continue and to flourish after, I don't know, the first 3 years, 5 years? How did you know that this is something that you can improve the odds of the videos and the content getting better? And I
Well, I
asked
didn't.
this, yeah, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I asked this because there are plenty of people that right out the gate, a year in, they're doing super well as creatives. They write a script and it's picked up by a network and they sell it. But there's people who are really good at what they do, and 8 years later, they're still on the grind. So, how did you know that this is a space that you can play ball in?
The truthful answer is I didn't, and I don't, and I still don't know. What you have to do is you have to be open enough to say, I'm going to try something that's new, that's going to scare the bejesus out of me. I'm going to just try, and I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm not ready to give up when it doesn't work out. I just want to grind through it. As the constant improver, that's how I keep going. So I produce videos that no one watches. I'm like, what can I do differently? Like, let me just keep trying. And that fails, and the next thing fails, and you just keep failing. And I know that every failure is a lesson, an opportunity in disguise. It's the blueprint on how you can be successful. And so I'm making sure I read the blueprint because I don't want to waste a perfectly good failure. This is what a lot of people do. So they fail and they feel the emotional sting like I'm a failure. People are going to think I'm a loser, and they don't examine the parts and pieces and put it back together, because those are all clues on how to succeed. So if you film something and the audio is horrible, you're like, oh, what a failure. Or perhaps you need to just work on the audio part. Get that part right. Yeah, the episode was a failure because I was so disorganized. Well, you don't just quit there. You're like, well, how can I become more organized? How do I give these calls, these sessions more structure? Well, sit down and write a freaking outline. Prepare some slides. Gather your thoughts. Perhaps you can prototype what you're going to say before you say it with your team members, these are all things I've done. And so slowly but surely, the algorithm reward you for trying to make improvements. Okay, so the people who've been grinding away at this for 8 years and have no results, I would say perhaps you're just doing more of the same instead of trying to find ways to improve it. And maybe, just maybe, what you're doing is great, but you need a mentor to point out the parts that aren't working for you. I remember early on, I became friends with somebody named Roberto Blake, and he had a call with us, and he said, hey, here's what I would do. I looked at your analytics, looked at your videos, here are 4 or 5 best practices. And sure enough, we implemented those things and they improved our channel. And at a certain point, we not only caught up to Roberto, we surpassed him in terms of his subscribers and our visibility and our influence. And I still have him to thank for those early days saying, hey, we're peers in this space. Let me help you out. Charge us any money. Just wanted to help. He's a real genuine guy. And I have a friendship with him now because of that. And I think that's really cool. So you have to look at yourself like, are you really trying to make it better or just doing more of the same? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. And then to be smart enough to know, like, I've gone as far as I can. I need help. I need professional people who've been here before, who are willing to help me either for free or for money. It doesn't really matter, but I'm willing to buy some experience so that I can get to the result faster. And you just do that. And I would say sometimes to people who shoot out of the gate and have early success, they're just as doomed as the people who grind at it who don't have any success at all, because you didn't go through the process of figuring out what didn't work. You found one way that worked, and then you're going to be paralyzed for the rest of your life. How do I get back here again?
Yeah, the podcast Freakonomics does a good one on this one. They dive deep into this idea of why the sophomore, what is it, the sophomore flop, or people who make the second album or the second film fails drastically. It's such an interesting sort of way of looking at the work that we all do. But that's really awesome, Chris. It gives me, and I hope a lot of the audience people that are listening a glimpse into sort of what we should be doing when we're setting out to create and make things in the world. At the Futur, which is your company, you give instructions for creatives on how to make money. Can you tell me about this business model that you have and talk a little bit about it? Because I know enough about it, but I would love for everybody to hear what you do at the Futur.
Sure. Thanks for asking that question. In the beginning, we were talking, and I told you that I didn't consider design in the creative space a viable career. Like, who knew? And then I do that, and I'm doing pretty good in my life. And then nobody told me you can actually make a viable career running an education company. I'm like, can we do this? I don't know. Maybe it'll work. I don't know. And you do it and you realize, oh my gosh, it's not so much the application or what it is that you do. It's who you do it for and the platform in which you do it on. And I talk about this quite a bit, like recently. When I taught at Art Center, I made like $56 an hour. From the beginning to the end, I think I got a $4 raise. In 15 years, that's what they gave me for adjusted for inflation, I think. So in reality, I was getting paid less than I was paying freelancers myself. And then I go and say, okay, I'm done with this. Obviously, I'm not teaching for the money. I'm teaching it for love, to give back, sense of community, pay it forward, all those kinds of things. Why don't I just do this on YouTube? I'm the same person, teaching relatively same things in arguably a less dynamic environment, and something weird happens. My effective hourly rate goes through the roof. So just keep in mind, I probably was never paid more than $60. I can't remember, somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 an hour to teach class. They don't pay you to prepare. They don't pay you for the commute. They don't pay you to do any extra work outside of the hours in which you're on campus teaching. So sometimes it's 3 hours, sometimes it's 5 hours, depending on the class. Now I take the same skill set. I'm gonna turn the camera on, I'm gonna publish it for free. And I'm gonna teach the same concepts. And now, if you wanna hire me or book me for a coaching session one-on-one, it's gonna cost you $5,000 an hour. If you wanna book me to do a keynote talk, it's gonna cost you $30,000 an hour, plus travel, plus hotel, plus transportation to and from. So is it radically different? No. Is the application different? No. I'm teaching the same things, but I just changed the platform. I took it to YouTube, I made money there. I took it to the stage, I make different kinds of money there. So a lot of times when we look at, are we failing? Are we really failing, or we just haven't found the right platform or the audience for what it is that we do? So there's many ways to succeed. There's a couple ways to fail, but failing to make changes as you go is probably the surest way to fail. Another guarantee of failure is to do nothing. You will fail for sure.
Wow. So how do you teach creators at the Futur? How do you what's the business model?
Okay, the business model. There's a couple of parts. I'll give you the high level overview, and if there's anything you want to go deeper on, I'm happy to. We make a lot of our money selling courses. So we have about a dozen courses with some things I've authored myself with other teachers, educators, and they range from $49 to $10,000 depending on the product of the course you enroll in. The higher touch ones obviously cost more. The ones that are more downloadable are less expensive. We make money through our two coaching communities, the Accelerator Group and the Futur Pro. People pay between $99 to $250 a month to be amongst their peers, to get a curriculum that's designed for them, a 21st century virtual school, if you will. We also make money through sponsorships. We run workshops. We sell merch and products. And no one of those things is going to make anybody rich, but all of them combined together. Last year, we did $5.4 million in revenue. That's how we do it. I forgot to mention AdSense. We do make some money on AdSense as well.
That's a whole lot more than $56 an hour.
A little bit.
It's incredible, man. Like I said, I've been following your work for many years. And just to see a Vietnamese person, a Vietnamese man, so visible out there on the social media space, it changes and it rattles and inspires so many people who are my generation and younger to do this. Do you know how much transformative, inspirational sort of lives that you've touched as a result of your work? Do you think about this at all?
I try not to think about it because my wife will tell me I got to keep the ego in check here. So I feel it. I feel it when people reach out, they send me DMs and they say, you helped me do this, or you prevented me from quitting this career. You gave me renewed inspiration or vigor to do my work, or you helped me to go from doing $1,000 project to a $10,000 project. So those are real tangible ROI on what it is that I do. And every once in a while, a person of color, an Asian American, a Vietnamese American, or Vietnamese person will say, you're my hero. You give me permission to do this crazy thing that I'm doing. And I love hearing that. And sometimes I get young people reaching out to me saying, my parents won't let me do this. They don't think that there's a viable career in the creative space. And I made this offer a couple of times. No one's ever taken me up on it. I said, have your parents call me.
Wow.
Literally, I'll talk to them. And if I can't convince them, then tough luck. They're just not really open to anything. But I'll tell them, so here's a story for you, because my uncle was just here and his daughters, my cousins, they're hanging out. In a weird way, I'm like the black sheep of the family. Everybody did something that's respectable. They're pharmacists. Some of them are nurses and doctors and lawyers, accountants and engineers. They're all doing what they're supposed to be doing in Silicon Valley. And I was the person who's like, I'm going to pursue art, to the chagrin of my dad, who's like, this is going to be horrific, right? And I go do my thing. My dad doesn't understand what I do for some time, but it's hard to argue with the success that comes with what I'm doing. And now all of a sudden I'm making more money than any of my cousins pursuing a legitimate field. Not in just a little bit, and I'm not saying this to brag, but in orders of magnitude more. So I'm doing more in less time and more consistently. And so now everybody's like, should we get business advice, career advice from Chris or one of the cousins? Who's the person who's creating the success for themselves? At the end of the day, here's what I want people to walk away with. Don't do something because you think it's going to make you rich or famous or popular. Do it because there's this burning, unquenchable, insatiable appetite or desire to do something that you're deeply passionate about, how you want to change the world, or how you want to make an impact. It could be in making sandwiches or being a nurse. It doesn't really matter. When you find that, what you do is you stoke the fire. You don't starve it. You feed it oxygen, you give it fuel, and you let it take it wherever it goes. And you may not be rich, but you'll live as a wealthy person. And that's more important than being rich. You're aligned with who you're supposed to be. And I think when you do that, a marker of financial success, I think, is a reflection of how aligned your life is. So right now, people ask me, what's next? I'm like, there's nothing next. This is it until I can't do this anymore. This is it until people say I'm bored of you. This is my life. I want to teach. I want to teach as many people as possible. I want to learn. I want to share. I want to have conversations. I want to move the needle for people. And I want to change the education system. So there's a lot of work ahead for us. Maybe more than one lifetime, but I'm committed to doing it.
And you've, in essence, been doing the same thing, just on different platforms since you were making $56 an hour. I mean, you are changing lives through education of design and marketing. So you, in essence, have been chasing your bliss for the last 20-something, 30 years of your professional life.
Yeah, 23 years now. I started teaching in early 2000s. And so you're right. I did it traditionally for a group of 15 to 20 students, sometimes 8 students at a time. I did that for a really long time. I would do independent studies. I would take on interns. So I'm constantly teaching. And I tell people, one of the primary roles as an entrepreneur is that of an educator, when you understand that your business and your life will change.
But I think the other layer or layers of what you do is when you start introducing the Seth Godins, the books, the Malcolm Gladwells, the stories. When I ask you questions, you respond back with the story, and then you back it up with an author. That shows that there is this, not only is this basic understanding, but I will give you supporting materials to even further direct you to go read or learn up on this idea. And then I think that's sort of why I feel like the success of what you've done is so successful, because of these multi-layered avenues that you provide alongside with the basics and the foundations that you talk about.
I want to share something that is semi-embarrassing to admit to you. I'm 51 years old. That's not the embarrassing part. I've read more books in the last 9 years of my life than the first 42 years of my life.
Wow.
So I share that for a couple different reasons. So if you're sitting back like, I don't read books, I don't watch videos, it's okay. I'm not here to sweat you. I don't really care. And you might think I'm too old, it's too late, and all that kind of stuff. Just keep in mind, I didn't make my first YouTube video. It was not a good one. The first YouTube video until I was 42, and it was 2014. That's when I made my first video in January 2014, because I have a date, I can see it. That's when we released our first YouTube video. And then began this quest. So a couple of years into making content, I remember seeing this clip of a young Gary Vaynerchuk lecturing at USC. And he was bombastic, and he was he was lucid, he was dropping things, and he was challenging, he was dropping F-bombs and pulling out quotes and data and statistics. And I remember very distinctly, Kenneth, that I was looking at that video and I was thinking to myself, how did he do that?
Yeah.
I could never be like that. Well, I am happy to say I'm not like that today, but people do perceive me like that. We're like, how are you pulling all these things? Yeah. So I was where you're at right now, whoever's listening to this or watching this, and thinking to myself, it is not possible. I cannot be that articulate. I cannot be that clear. I cannot recite the kinds of things I've learned. You can if you work at it.
That's so encouraging. I obviously have a ton more questions, but I think I'm going to save it. And now, after having this sort of baseline conversation with you, bring you back on the podcast, if it's okay, to talk very specifically about future things like the branding of Vietnam and the direction of, as a Vietnamese person, how important that is to you. There's so many other things that I want to touch up on, but I think now that we have this baseline, we can save it for very specific topics, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Kenneth.
Yes,
what
Chris.
is your connection to Vietnam?
What is my connection to Vietnam?
Yeah. Why are you so interested in the branding and the building and the industry and the media and all that kind of stuff?
The simple answer is shame. We grew up very ashamed of being Vietnamese. I remember my mom saying, when we used to go to airports to pick up my family coming in from LAX, and throughout those years and then subsequent years when I was a little older, she would always say, look at those guys. Those guys are Americans. You know, they're tall white guys or whatever, right? Those guys are Americans. How do I know? Because of the way they walk, the way they carry themselves. Inadvertently, I think that's sort of like the tip of the iceberg of the shame that we all, Vietnamese Americans or Vietnamese all around the world, kind of experience after the war. And I think I was hit the hardest because I was like one of the firstborn Vietnamese. I was born in November 1975, born in the US, and having this sort of weird, well, I'm an American. I'm so proud to be American. But then at the same time, I'm not Vietnamese because I was not born in Vietnam. So I lived in these two very different worlds. And then I joined the Marine Corps. And before I joined the Marine Corps, I was like living in the hood with, all Black and Mexican kids, being put down, and then once I got to school, at one point I went to an all white school, and it was just jarring wherever I went because there was another Vietnamese people, and I was always put down for being a Vietnamese person. But I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm like, I'm built like a Marine, and I've kept my exercise going after all those years in the Marines, but I still feel this shame, and I work out so hard because I work my brain out, and I work my cultural sensitivity about who I am out, and my physique out, so I don't feel like nothing. And that's what drives me to explore more and more and more deep about the Vietnamese culture. I work out and I try to prove to the world, whether it's physical or emotional or intellectual, that being Vietnamese, is something to be very proud of. So I think I live in the light and the dark when it comes to this idea of proliferating the Vietnamese overseas, or just being a Vietnamese person in general, that I want the world to see us in a much more positive light than I have seen myself.
Yeah, I share that with you. It was not until I graduated college that I started to understand that Asian people can be proud of their own ethnicity. It's taken me a long time. You're like, what? So I'm just a few years older than you.
Yeah.
I did not have the benefit of being born here, but I think our stories are almost the same. Never feeling like we fit in, having great shame of our own ethnicity, not feeling like we belong in one space or the other. And I had to combat that in very physical ways at points, some oftentimes verbal and then mental. And so it's this narrative that you develop over time. And the West and mostly white Europeans are very good at saying, this is the mold of perfection. People that are the smartest, the brightest, and everything that we have is the model to chase after, right? They've done this all over the world as conquerors, as imperialists or whatever. And so they're like, we're superior, you're inferior, we're superior. And then we start to internalize this dialogue so that Asian people start repeating those same words to ourselves, to our children, to our siblings. We are inferior in every way, right? It's very damaging. So I'm in college, and for graduation, there are a lot of international students. I'm probably one of the poorest people there, relatively speaking, because there are a lot of rich people that go to art school. And then I see Koreans and Japanese and people from China, from Taiwan, wearing their native dress. And they walk around like peacocks. I'm like, what? Because it's not what I would wear. And at first my reaction was like, oh, this looks really bad. Don't you guys, shouldn't you guys be wearing suits and dresses and wear your Western attire? But the difference between them and us is they grew up where they were the dominant people. Their culture reigned supreme and they didn't know anything else. So of course they're proud to be Japanese or Taiwanese or Chinese or Korean. They showed up in their dress. And it was one of the first times I actually saw people who looked at their culture, their identity, their language, their customs, and how they dress as a thing of pride. Not just a little bit of pride, but a lot of pride.
A lot of pride.
And it made me really check in with myself. Like, I've been living with a lot of self-hate, and I was ashamed now for thinking those thoughts that we're inferior. And I did think that for a long time. You know, one of my wishes as a child was like, I wish I were white. I wish I would just belong here, because I'm tired of being bullied. I'm tired of being harassed. I'm tired of teachers and substitute teachers butchering my name and not even trying to make an effort. And so I'm there with you. I think we have similar ideas, maybe different execution of those ideas, where I think there's a stereotypical idea about Asian men being effeminate, being good at math, just not being manly enough, being unfit and weak and all those kinds of things. Or conforming, like we're great at assimilation, there's no originality, all those kinds of things that they put as a blanket label over Asian culture. So what I try to do in my own way is to say, I want to be an example in my career choice, in my creativity, in my ability to achieve excellence in the world, in the way that I dress, in the way that I carry myself, that you can be all these things. You could be creative and you could be fit. You can be an entrepreneur and you can be kind. You could be successful and suck at math. All these things are possible. And I just want to shake up the stereotype of what the mold looks like so that people, Asian, white, black, it doesn't really matter, person of color, gay, straight, non-binary, whatever, can say, you know what? If that monkey, meaning me, can do it, I can do it. And now, oddly enough, I live in my life now where I tried to stand out, whereas most of my life I tried to blend in because I don't want trouble. Yeah. Now it's like, you want to start a conversation with me? I invite you to, because I'm going to wear things, I'm going to say things, I'm going to do things that provoke interaction because I want to have that dialogue with you.
You know, that resonates with me, and what you said earlier about the car companies. You know, you do it for 10 years and you got to do it correct. You have to execute correctly. That resonates with me because I feel like for 20 years, I tried to emulate the white man in every aspect of the way I talk, my speech patterns, the way I worked out, the way I, really tried to attack this problem. And without learning what goes on from the white side, it is probably very difficult to kind of talk about what I do on the Vietnamese side today. And so today I embrace all of it, all of the imperfections, the shame, the beauty of the Vietnamese, the beauty of even American culture. All of it is sort of the way that, and I think that I'm only just a few percentage points into what I've even really understood, because there's so much that I've gotten wrong in the last 3 years on my journey as well. And so talking to somebody like you and seeing how this is all shaping up is, again, I think it's just the beginning of the journey for the Vietnamese community throughout the world.
I want to share something with you, in that I've been meaning to come back to Vietnam. I've never been back since leaving. I tried, and then COVID happened, and my wife and I had to cancel all our plans. We had this multi-week adventure in Vietnam with my parents. All my siblings have gone back. My parents have gone back multiple times, as have my brothers and my cousins. I'm the last one to return home, not because I don't want to, but here's the weird thing. Everywhere in the world I go, people pay me to go and speak and do workshops and things like that. Some Vietnamese brothers reached out to me And they're like, we're not going to pay you, but we can get you a flight. Like, that's the least of my concerns right now. And I just felt like they're trying to exploit my nationalistic pride, and I was just not having it. And maybe I need to rethink that. I want to know what your thoughts are. It's like, you're going to speak here for free because you're an Asian brother or Vietnamese brother. I'm like, boy, it's no love, but like your own love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's another problem too. It's like best practices. I think sometimes our Vietnamese community don't understand that. Best practices are best practices anywhere you go, whether it's in the American community or Vietnamese American community or Vietnamese German. It's best practices means just doing the best thing when you invite a keynote or when you invite somebody over. So I really will probably have to talk off air and find out who these people were, who the brothers were that invited you over, because I can imagine, there's an ambassador from Vietnam to the EU. She's retired, and she's putting together a summit or a weekend or a week of rebranding Vietnam. Chris, you'd be one of the perfect guys. If it came from that corner of Vietnam, and they had a limited budget, then that's one conversation, right? But if it's coming from like the real estate industry, Vietnamese real estate industry here in America, and they want you to go back to Vietnam to kind of talk to them about brand, that's a whole different animal, right? And which community it comes from is relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, and this was not from an official like let's do good in the world community.
Yeah,
it's just another entrepreneur saying, hey, come here. I can probably take care of your flight. I'm like, no thanks. Not right now.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, whenever you go to Vietnam, after you come back, I would definitely like to sit back down and get an episode to hear your thoughts about your Vietnamese experience. But before you go, I probably want to end on this. My question is, what do you think will be your life experience or your living experience in Vietnam once you get there? How do you think it will, what kind of ways do you think I don't want to say, well, how do you think it's going to transform you? Because who knows, but are you anticipating that sort of transformation? What are you kind of wanting from the trip of returning to Vietnam?
I try not to go into experiences with too many expectations, because the more expectations you have, the more likely you are to be disappointed. Now, when I go to Vietnam, there'll be a couple of different reasons. Number one, my parents are getting older. They're quite old these days, and I want to be able to have that trip with them, to be able to walk the streets they walked on, to have them tell their stories and just feel that energy, that love, and that nostalgia with them, because they've been back and they have parts they love and they have parts that they hate. But to be able to do that with them, like every time I get a chance to travel with my mom and dad, I look forward to it. The other part too is my wife is planning a trip. She's talking about going to visit like one of the deepest caves in the world. And she's a deeply spiritual person. She is about energy, and there's some magical places on earth that have a certain frequency and energy. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to, I think on this trip, leave all my professional obligations aside so I can be 100% focused on doing the things that we're supposed to be doing as a family. So I think we're heading back during the winter holiday so that my boys can come with us without disrupting their school. I want to experience the cuisine, the culture, the sights and the smells, the good and the bad, the hot weather, the humidity, or the cool air, whatever it is, just to say like, yeah, this is like the birthplace for me. And I just want to get that connection, like foot on the ground, feeling the earth and breathing the air, and putting all the other expectations aside. On a different kind of trip, I'd love to do business-oriented things where I can help train and teach people and show people you can be a successful Vietnamese person in the world and be looked up to by a lot of non-Vietnamese people. It is possible because, like I said, if I can do it, you can do it. And I want to share those experiences and be as open as I can with whoever wants to share stuff with me. But, I also watch people who live in Vietnam who are expats from America, I guess. They're Americans living in Vietnam, and they're eating the food and they're talking about it's $2 for this, 50 cents for that. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to eat the street food. I want to go into the side alleys and walk into an old lady's home and say, I'd like to eat bánh xèo. I want to do something. I want to eat bánh quán. Let's go. Let's try this. And to support the smaller businesses throughout the beaten path. Unfortunately, I have such a weak stomach the slightest thing that's wrong, it'll run right through my body like a river runs through the valley, you know? So who knows what'll happen there? Everybody's so scared of eating uncooked food there that haven't lived there that their stomach can't handle it. And I know my stomach can't handle it, but I'm still willing to roll the dice.
Well, I think years past and 10 years past, 20 years past, those were huge concerns about going back for the first time and eating and then having like these dysentery or problems with their stomach. But I will say that if you go back the first 2 days, if there's anything 3 days that you eat and it'll jam you up or mess you up, make it flow, then for the rest of the trip, it'll be better. And then for subsequent trips back to Vietnam, you won't have issues anymore because the gut biome thing, it does its thing. The bacteria that it has, these foreign bacteria are now living in your stomach. So you won't experience the same violent episodes. And I say that through my own experience and just watching many Vietnamese Americans go back throughout the years. And that's sort of their consensus is like you go down the first trip and you go down for a day or two. I went down for 3 nights the first time I went back, and I've been fine ever since. So
now, are you the type of person to hold on to your stomach bug, or are you the one that lets it flow?
No, you got to let it flow. You can't control it.
I know, but naturally, like when you eat a bad burrito, are you sick for days?
No, I'm sick for a day.
Okay, I'm not sick for like an hour. It goes right through my body like hot liquid.
Oh, and then you're fine after that?
I'll be fine. Yeah, I don't get sick. Like I have a cousin who holds onto his food. He's like throwing up and diarrhea for days. I'm like, no, it just goes right through me.
Yeah. Then you're gonna be fine, Chris. You're gonna be fine.
Just be near a bathroom.
Yeah, and you know what? I forget you were born there, so I'm sure those gut biomes or whatever that you experienced 50 years ago is still there, and I don't think it's that foreign. And the conditions in Vietnam are so much cleaner today. There's malls there and restaurants there that are newer than they are in the US. Theaters there. The modernization of Vietnam is mind-blowing. Yeah, so I can't wait to hear maybe we can meet up for lunch or something in Vietnam. I'll be back in December as well.
Oh, okay.
3 weeks.
I hope to see you. I'll look for the tall 6-foot Asian guy.
Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.